right, so we're recording on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2026, and tomorrow, February 15th, is what, our 5th anniversary.
That's right.
Of this podcast. We've done this podcast for 5 years. That's the 5th anniversary of our first ever upload of our 30-plus minute first episode.
Right. Now we're running on an average of 3 hours per episode.
Yeah, now you just can't stop us talking, you know. And as usual, before the podcast, we had a much more interesting conversation than we have
already
during the podcast. We should just start rolling the tape and just put that on.
I guess we should do that, yeah.
Yeah, it'll make it longer, but I think it'll be more entertaining. Anyway.
5 years, more than 250 episodes.
Yeah.
And 1,400 albums plus. Wow.
Boy, and counting. There are already 6 more coming next week. We already have figured out what those are going to be. And the Adult Music Podcast rolls on.
I guess they say 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 20 because they run out of things to talk about and they get tired of the preparation and production.
Well, that's never going to happen to us because there's always new music.
That's true. I may die at the production desk someday. But
that could happen. That wouldn't be a bad way to go, really. I don't know.
Anyway, this is our 5th anniversary, episode 247. I said we had 250 because there's 8 interviews out there as well. And before we get going into the new content, the new music for this week, I want to send out some thanks for last week. Thanks to the jazz artists that we featured last week, saxophonist Max Kokotov and composer-pianist Ramiro Zayas for sharing our episode on their Facebook pages, as well as to Antonio Martino of AMA Records for sharing on both of his pages as well. And this week we've got another music passing, don't we, in classical?
You want to do the theme there? You got to do the theme. Okay.
I guess I've got to get over to the piano again. Here we go.
Okay. German choral conductor Helmut Rilling died on February 11th. And he was a great interpreter of Johann Sebastian Bach's music, the first conductor to record all of Bach's nearly 200 sacred cantatas.
Wow.
Sacred cantatas. Okay, there are secular ones too. Along with vast portions of his choral output. He established enduring institutions like the Oregon Bach Festival in 1970. So all of you out in Oregon, might remember him. And the Internationale Bach Academy Stuttgart in 1981. I actually remember them. He will be remembered for reshaping modern choral performance and bringing Bach's sacred music to audiences worldwide with passion and insight. He was 92 years old when he died.
All right, rest in peace.
Yeah, another great Bach interpreter.
All right, this week we've got a bunch of new music that's all pretty exciting as well, I think.
I thought so.
But before we get to it, I want to remind everyone that in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the recordings that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. Now, if you can't see the full description or if the recording list and links are hard to access wherever you're listening to us now, please come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe and tell a music-loving friend. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations on the various podcast services, and that's another way that we can grow our audience. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can leave a message or comment there. Check us out on X, where we post links to the new episodes. We're Adult Music Pod over there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're going to play music sample clips as part of our discussion, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. We're going to start out in Baroque as usual and with a focus on the low end, Mike.
Yeah, we got some low-end stuff going today, I think. This is a pretty interesting album. This is the Greco brothers, Rocco and Gaetano Greco. This is works for violoncello, bass violin, and keyboard. The ensemble is called I Mastricelli. I guess I should name them. Antonio Pellegrino plays the cello and bass violin. Agata Sorotokin, harpsichord. Asako Ueda on the theorbo, arch lute, and guitar. Marino Gonzalez Garcia, viola da gamba. Alan Portal on bass violin. And Caroline Kang also on bass violin. But they don't all play together. They kind of mix it up in an interesting way. This is on the Challenge Classics label, released on February 6th. Now, Rocco and Gaetano Greco were at the very heart of Neapolitan musical life in the late 17th century. By the way, I had an Italian teacher named Mr. Greco when I was in grade school, and he was not well liked by the students. He would often lecture us about, I remember him saying, "Your minds are filled with garbage." He would say that often. Well, I think he'd be proud of me today because my mind is filled with classical music, so
yeah,
I guess I overcame.
You turned it around.
Yeah, I turned it around. Anyway, no relation, although who knows. But the Greco brothers, Rocco was a virtuoso string player. You don't really meet many people named Rocco these days, do you?
Not too many, no.
They used to be around, I remember. Rocco is a virtuoso string player who taught at the Conservatorio Poveri di Gesù Cristo, where his brother Gaetano also worked as a pedagogue of Neapolitan counterpoint. His works on this album create dialogues between two bass parts, celebrating the sound world of lower voiced instruments in conversation with one another, and that's what we're going to hear on this album. The music on this album all arises from a Neapolitan notational device closely connected to basso continuo called the partimento. This is like a new term for me. Partimenti were designed to allow the creation of a complete musical piece from a given bass, figured or unfigured, functioning as a musical canovaccio, or outline, to be completed through improvisation and stylistic elaboration. The aim was to unfold a given bass's latent polyphony and rhetorical potential in real time. Okay, Bach kind of did a lot of this too, kind of realizing the bass or all the possibilities of a theme. If you're interested in this, there's more on the compositional use of this device in the CD booklet. It's not very technical, but you got to know a little bit about what figured bass is to understand it. I Mastricelli is an early music ensemble founded in 2023, so they're pretty new.
Yeah.
At the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, which is in the Netherlands, so they're a Dutch ensemble. They're Holland-based, but they're pretty international musicians. Okay, let's start listening here. The first track, Rocco Greco. His years, by the way, are around 1650 to 1717, so he's contemporary with Bach, a little earlier, really, but they were contemporaries for a time. Sinfonia Vigesima Terza a due viole, another one of those great catchy titles from the Baroque era. If I like this, I'm not going to know how to ask for it. I'm not going to remember this name. This features Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Alan Portal bass violin, Agata Sorotokin harpsichord, and Asko Ueda. I think she's on the theorbo here. I'm having to go. It doesn't indicate which instrument she's playing, so I'm just having to guess by the sound. This sounds like a cello and bass violin there. It's got a deep, haunting sound at the beginning, and Ueda seems to be on the theorbo, as I said. Let's just get an earful of this sound world. Subwoofer cones rejoice. There's 50 more minutes of this. This piece suddenly starts a dancing rhythm at 52 seconds, really just at the point where I fade it out, and the mood instantly lightens. We'll hear more of those more lively bits later because there are a lot of them on the album. At 1 minute and 45 seconds after a cadence, then a pause, a new movement starts. So they've kind of combined movements into single tracks, which I approve of in this case because these pieces are so short, really. The new movement has a cheerful dancing rhythm to it, and I like the melodizing from the cello on that one. And the piece ends with a nice flourish, And then on track 2, we go to a solo harpsichord work by Rocco's younger brother Gaetano Greco. This one features Agata Sorotokin on the harpsichord, and she's recorded close up and sounds clear but louder than real life, but that's no problem. Agata Sorotokin's sound is clean and the pauses carry a lot of weight. This piece has a lot of space in it at the beginning. At 1 minute and 2 seconds, a new fugal section begins, and I'm going to start the sample from there. Yeah, so it's not a really bright sounding instrument. So despite the fact that it's recorded close up, it's got sort of a slightly muted tone to it. I really like it. This is taken at a cautious but flowing speed. I like the way the performance unfolds. The sound has an intimate quality to it. A varied set of returns of the theme follow, thickening in texture as the piece goes on for a while, and then subtly changing the rhythmic patterns. Track 3, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Settima a due viole. Allegro. This features Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Caroline Kang, bass violin, Asako Ueda is playing the guitar here. The overall sound here is intimate due to the interaction of only 2 melodic instruments. This is an appealing piece with a catchy melodic pattern and rhythm. You know, I think the dry acoustic really serves this music really well.
Yeah.
Track 4, Gaetano Greco, Passagallo for the arch lute. This features Asako Ueda on the arch lute. This is a gentle piece on a really gentle sounding instrument. An arch lute is just a big lute. It's an instrument with not as much sustain as a guitar. The melody is pretty and sensitive. You know, I think you could charm the ladies today with an arch lute. It's just such a nice, sensitive sound.
Cool looking, too.
Yeah. Track 5, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia XXIV a due viole. Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Alan Portal bass violin, Agata Sorotkin harpsichord, Asako Ueda, probably the arch lute here. The theme is strongly played at the beginning, then gets more delicate at around the 1 minute mark. At 1 minute and 58 seconds, there's a pause, and a more vigorous rhythm comes in. This sounds like a separate movement, and I'd like to sample the more vigorous part here. Now, track 6, Gaetano Greco, is a partimento for harpsichord, featuring Agata Sorotokin on harpsichord. Now remember, a partimento is that piece built up over a bass. The difference in harpsichord tone in the solo pieces as compared to the pieces where it plays continuo is very noticeable. It's much closer up and drier in the solo tracks, and the sound suits the harpsichord solo works well. This piece is a pleasant listen and rather simple. It's a dancey piece and it's rather brief, so I'll send you to hear that on your own. Track 7, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Decima Sesta a due viole. Man, that's hard to say. Largo, Presto, and Corrente. Antonio Pellegrino. Marino Gonzalez Garcia appears here on the viola da gamba. Agata Sorotokin on harpsichord, and Asako Ueda. Now, I don't know what she's playing here, but Pellegrino is on the cello. It's got a mournful feel to it, and around the 1 minute and 15 seconds, there's a change to a climbing, more active line from the cello, sounding virtuosic here. After this, there's a pause, followed by a rocky melody in 3/4, and this goes until the end of the piece. Track 8, Gaetano Greco, Tarantella. Now, if you're getting out your dancing shoes for this one, put them away. This is kind of an interesting sounding Tarantella. Antonio Pellegrino sounds like he's on the bass violin on this track, so we have 2 bass violins. Alan Portal bass violin, Agata Sorotokin harpsichord, and Asko Ueda on a guitar here. The sound is clean with lots of space. This doesn't have a vigorous energy of a tarantella, but it's one in form. Let's hear a little bit of it. I guess those triplets in the violin line are what makes it a tarantella. I'm not really sure because that rhythm isn't as vigorous as I'm used to. The bass violin here plays a melody over the rhythm throughout. Track 9, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia 22ª a due viole. Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Alan Portal bass violin, Agata Sorotokin harpsichord, Asko Ueda, I don't know, theorbo, archlute, or guitar. This sounds mournfully with a cello and bass violin in harmony. It gains a bit of energy in its second section. Rocco composes in 2 movements, the first separated in 2 sections. A second movement starts at 1 minute and 20 seconds, and that's what we're going to sample. Like Rocco's other works, this section is vigorous and features some quick bowing on the cello. Track 10, new composer, Francesco Mancini, and this is his only work on the album, Toccata Sesta, Partimento. This features Agata Sorotokin on the harpsichord. She's the only musician on the track. It begins with an introductory section with an improvisatory quality. A new, gently striding section begins at the 42nd mark. This would be the Partimento, I guess. And the figuration picks up afterwards. It actually gets denser as it goes. It's a pretty interesting piece. Let's hear a bit of the faster part. The piece seems to speed up once it approaches the 2-minute mark. There's a cadence and a pause, followed by some of the more interesting harmony we've heard in an improvisatory section. There's some really great chords in there, too, some dissonances and we heard some on the sample. This gradually builds up steam, gains some sparkle by the 3-minute mark, and there's a nice improvisatory finish at the end. Track 11, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Terza a due viole. Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Alan Portal bass violin, Agata Sorotokin harpsichord, and Asuko Ueda playing her continuo instrument, which I didn't indicate here. The cello starts deep in its range, rising from a throaty sound to something more lyrical. The section is over by 1 minute and 10 seconds, and after a pause, a livelier, stately dance-like rhythm is set for the cello to melodize over. There's a more subtle change of rhythm and tempo initiated by the harpsichord just before the 3-minute mark. This ends at 3 minutes and 38 seconds, and a light jig-like 6/8 rhythm comes in for the last theme in the piece. This particular sinfonia is rich in ideas, and I'm going to send you to hear this one on your own. Track 12, Anonymous, Balletto Francese. Agata Sorotokin is on the solo harpsichord, and this piece is very brief. It's only 1 minute. It's got grace, and right before phrase endings, an odd harmony followed by a pause after the phrase ends. Listen to this one while you're hearing that previous track. Track 13, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Decima Ottava a due viole. Antonio Pellegrino on the cello, Marino Gonzalez Garcia viola da gamba, Agata Sorotokin harpsichord, and Asuko Ueda is playing her continuo string instrument. Didn't indicate these because they blend with the harpsichord, and I often couldn't tell what it was. I wish they had listed them for each track, but they didn't. This starts deep in the cello with some satisfying growls at the beginning, and this is what we at Adult Music are all about that bass. Let's hear it. Wish you had a great false cadence before that cadence that I just faded out on. Really great. The opening has a memorable melody that reaches out of the murky depths. The cello is particularly melodic in this work and gets a lot of time in the spotlight. At 2 minutes and 41 seconds, once again, a separate, more rhythmically upbeat section begins. This time, the first section is not divided into 2 parts. The cello's melody ends, and this new section, with the cello in the lead again, begins. I particularly liked this entire piece. Track 14, Gaetano Greco, Sinfonia. Antonio Pellegrino here is on the bass violin, Agata Sorotokin on harpsichord. It's a very brief piece. This is dancey and melodic, very upbeat. Track 15, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Quarta, a due viole, Allegro, Balletto, and Corrente. So we have 3 sections or movements. This features Marino Gonzalez Garcia on viola da gamba. Antonio Pellegrino is playing on this one too. This has a cello, so Pellegrino's on the cello here. The viola da gamba has the opening and plays an arpeggiated figure with the cello, then coming into play in unison. There's no continuo here, just the 2 solo string instruments. Let's hear them from the dotted rhythm that starts just before the 2-minute mark. Yeah, we get that kind of like little light cantering kind of melody there, that dotted rhythm. The piece moves in what sounds like variations. There's a new rhythm at 3 minutes. I like the feel that the viola da gamba brings with its less centered tone. It sort of spreads out a bit. The piece ends with the evaporating of the phrase. Pretty interesting. Track 16, Gaetano Greco, Partimento. Again, that's that building over the bass melody. This features Asako Ueda's solo on the arch lute. Let's hear a little bit of her here. The arch lute has a quiet, gentle, understated tone, as you could hear in that sample. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, there's a pause and a subtle change to the rhythmic pattern as a new section and melody begin. The instrument sounds a bit muted here. The piece ends with a soft, arpeggiated cadence. Track 17, Rocco Greco, Sinfonia Quinta a due viole. This one has a subtitle, La prima viola suona di numeri, or the first viola plays the numbers. I don't think they mean the the numbers that you gamble on. I think this is more like intervals here. Okay, Allegro. Antonio Pellegrino on the cello. Caroline Kang, bass violin. Agata Sorotokin on harpsichord. 2 string instruments played together, the cello handling counter melody and bass, while the bass violin plays the theme. Harpsichord accompanies. The theme here is once again attractive. There's a cadence at 1 minute and 23 seconds, and a livelier theme emerges, and I will be sampling that livelier theme. I like the interplay between the two melodies here. The ending slows down and stretches out the cadence a bit. Track 18, Gaetano Greco and Carlo Milanuzzi, Ballo della Torcia. This is a stately dance from the bass violin, played by Antonio Pellegrino, with Agata Sorotokin's harpsichord the only accompaniment. The theme is varied throughout. There's none of the low bass sound that we've heard on the album, on many of the album's tracks. But this piece is a light, pleasing way to end the album, sort of in the high end. Let's listen to a little bit of this. And that's how the album ends. This album turned out to be a bit of a melodic surprise, although I guess, being that the two brothers were from Naples, that probably shouldn't be a surprise. Naples really is this melodic powerhouse of a city. The music of the Greco brothers is on the earlier side of the Baroque style, ushering in compositional ideas that were new at the time. The result is highly melodic works, often played deep in the cello. I Mastricelli have arranged this program so that we won't stay in a single registral range for long, with Antonio Pellegrino playing cello on most of the tracks, providing the low end for Alan Portal and Caroline Kang on bass violin, and Marino Gonzalez Garcia playing viola da gamba on one track. Well, actually, he plays on more than one track, but he's got a solo on one. Pellegrino occasionally playing bass violin himself. He appears on all of the tracks except the solo ones, and those feature harpsichordist Agata Sorotokin's clear-sounding instrument and Asako Ueda's various plucked string instruments, played with her gentle touch. It's an album of expressive works that generally arrive at uplifting endings It's an enjoyable record and set of compositions to discover.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Read the album notes first to get the most from your listening time. It explains the portamento and how it was written as a basis for embellishments and improvisations. Rocco Greco's writing here features dual bass parts and dialogue, and that was unique and really interesting to listen to.
And really still is unique.
Yeah. The pieces are all short and played with flair here by E. Mastricelli. We also get some harpsichord and a mix of other instruments, especially from Asako Ueda. It's a worthwhile focus on the low end in the Baroque and an easy listen.
All right, next we've got an album by a classical music compositional giant, played by a piano giant.
Yeah.
This is Schumann's Fantasie in C major, a really great piece that I don't feel gets played enough, to be honest. It's big, as you'll hear. This album also features carnival scenes from Vienna and Humoreske in B-flat major, played by Nikolai Lugansky on the piano. And boy, what a pianist he is. Indeed. There are lots of them out there now, by the way. There's a lot of great pianists playing. This is on the Harmonia Mundi label, released on February 6th. And this album has packed a lot of music onto it.
It sure has.
It's 3 pieces, but they're all pretty long, and they all fit on one CD somehow. Tracks 1 through 3 are Schumann's famous Fantasie in C major, Opus 17. He wrote this when he wanted to marry Clara Schumann, but her dad wouldn't let her, and this was one of his love letters to her, and they eventually did get married, as we know, and became one of the great couples in classical music. How appropriate for Valentine's Day. It was actually conceived as a personal contribution to the plan to erect a public monument in Bonn to the memory of Beethoven, but it's got love letter elements to Clara in it too, okay? The 3 movements have the cryptic titles Ruins, Trophies, and Palms, which were all suppressed when Schumann published the score. And this is a really interesting score because Schumann is a very visual and verbal composer as well. Like, he kind of seems to try to put conceptual ideas into his music, and this first movement is a good example of that. And so is the third movement. We'll get to that later. The first movement is labeled Durchaus fantastisch und leidenschaftlich vorzutragen im Legendenton. So make sure you play it that way, pianists. I don't understand what that means. I have to put my Google Translate over that to figure it out. And it's a chorale, apparently. One thing that drew me to this piece long ago is the printing in the score of an enigmatic line of a poem by Friedrich Schlegel. And this is what it is. Every sound that suffuses the earth's colorful dream contains a quiet, protracted note for whoever is secretly listening out for it. It's in German, of course, but that's the English translation, or one of many. The title Ruins seems to signify the past intruding on the present, the image of the smallness of man, death, absence, and it's related to the aesthetic idea of the fragment promoted by Novalis and the Schlegel brothers, and Schumann was a big fan of the fragment, as were many Romantic composers. Think Chopin's Preludes, for example. The movement is hybrid in form, displaying from the outset the spirit of liberty and improvisation. The coda features a fragment from Beethoven's song cycle An die ferne Geliebte, and the sound is clean and well-defined, with the tone getting a bit of a shine to it. Lugansky gives a lot of dynamic contrast. He's got a lot of shading in his playing. It's really amazing. With the first theme sounding boldly, then pulling back dramatically, so we know what kind of piano playing we're in store for right away. There's a gorgeous flow to the material, too. Let's hear the opening. I hope you're noticing all of those trills and all of the different registers. What a pain this piece must be to play. One of the cool things about it, too, is you heard that descending line at the beginning. It keeps coming back, but it's played in a different rhythm, and sometimes it's abbreviated. It's really interesting the way that Schumann manipulates that theme throughout the movement. Romantic works tend to blur due to the pedal, and Romantic composers wanted that effect. They wanted like a sort of lack of clarity because of, first of all, they're going against the classical era where clarity was the absolute rule. And they also wanted their works to be dreamlike, and dreams are sort of like, one image fades into another, and they wanted their music to do that too. In this performance, though, each line is remarkably clear. I love it, but I'm not really sure that this is what Schumann would have wanted, although it does have this grand sort of romantic sound to it. Lugansky gets a lot of sensitivity into the pianissimo dynamics just around the 3-minute mark, and boldness into the more fortissimo parts that follow. There's a lot of trilling in this movement, which I hadn't noticed before, but becomes clear in this performance, really due to the clarity of Lugansky's playing. I like the handling of the set of variations given to the theme at the 5-minute mark. Lugansky giving them all a distinct character. He's got a lot of ideas on how to put this material across. New themes are set off by a change in approach, and again, I feel like these should blur into each other, but I'm greatly enjoying the clarity of this performance, I have to confess. There's a great example of that romantic blurring effect at around the 7-minute mark, so he does do it, between the two hands playing rhythmically against each other. The fortissimi come across with power, but don't overpower the listener. They're well caught on the recording, and it's amazing how clearly the left-hand figuration registers on the recording. Listen at around the 8-minute and 45-second mark for that. Lugansky plays with great sensitivity in the more poetic sections of the movement. The ending of the movement has that sensitivity too, so Lugansky playing like a poet. Track 2, the second movement, Mäßig, durchaus energisch. This is in 3 parts. It's a scherzo with a slower movement in the middle. There's a quotation from Beethoven's Fidelio in the central trio. The movement has a forte, regal opening. Clara Schumann said something to the effect that this made her think of a medieval crowning ceremony in one of her letters to Robert Schumann, I seem to recall, and I haven't been able to get that image out of my mind since reading that passage. There are then playful dotted rhythms, and I want to hear a bit of that. This is about 50 seconds into the movement. Schumann really loved that dotted rhythm. He uses it in a lot of his music. It always makes me think of a child on a hobby horse, really, because of in Kinderscenen, he used that rhythm for a movement that was dedicated to that image. So It stuck with me, and every time I hear it, I just think of that now. At the 3-minute and 10-second mark, the music suddenly changes to a B section, which is hushed, but with some teasing reminders of the opening. I like the dancing quality given to the section at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, Lugansky really alive to the rhythm of the piece, as well as the dynamics. At the 6-minute mark, the regal opening returns, even more emphatic now. Lugansky builds up energy nicely as he approaches the end via an accelerando and crescendo that ends the movement powerfully. He gets a big sound on his fortissimi, and they register well on the recording, too. Track 3, my favorite movement. This is the third movement, langsam getragen, durchweg leise zu halten. This is composed in 5 sections, and it's my understanding that Schumann was evoking a fata morgana in this movement, in the more delicate arpeggiated moments of this movement. And it's something seemingly magical. You can hear it right at the opening. What a fata morgana is like it's a visual illusion. For example, you'd look out to sea and you see like maybe a tanker, far in the distance, but it's upside down and floating above the waves. It's an optical illusion, so that's called the Fata Morgana. I've actually never seen one. But he's trying to evoke that here, and you can hear it right at the beginning, and that's what I'm going to sample. This gentle pattern comes back at times during the movement. It's got a twinkling quality to it, and its hazy sound evokes the Fata Morgana well. Lugansky's sensitive touch and pedaling make this effective. Listen again at around the 2 minutes and 24 second mark. When the opening theme comes in, how the touch goes from piano to pianissimo. It's really gorgeously played. The music will wind its way out of the opening theme and build up in energy, then suddenly revert back to that opening. Lugansky always marking the opening section off via a quiet, dynamic, and hazy-sounding tone. Toward the end, at around the 9 minute and 30 second mark, we get a crescendo to a genuine forte. For I believe the first time in the movement, it's a pretty quiet movement. And the tone is firm and clear here, like we've emerged out of the mist. And the piece ends like that. It's a rather unusual final movement for a Romantic era piece, given how quiet it is. Romantic composers wanted you to leap out of your seat at the end of the movement and, applaud wildly, but this piece doesn't really invite that. Tracks 4 through 8, Faschingsschwank aus Wien, Opus 26. That means Carnival Scenes from Vienna. It's a witty and facetious work. The work evokes pranks observed during a Viennese carnival. Track 4 is the first movement, Allegro sehr lebhaft. This begins with a rondo, so already things are upside down. And in fact, the last movement is going to be a sonata, so he's reversed the usual order of the movements of this composition. You can hear the Marseillaise in this movement too, and you should keep in mind that when this was composed, the Marseillaise was banned in Imperial Vienna under the strict censorship of Metternich. The rondo theme is, of course, catchy and rather jaunty. Okay, we get away from the theme and go into the first departure from that rondo theme. Again, Lugansky leads into the rhythm of the theme. At the 42-second mark, we're already off into a dreamier, quiet section with a lot of counter melody happening. The rondo theme comes back in abruptly, as is in its character. The character of the departure sections tends to be quieter. The second one has more of a rhythmic quality to it. The third, at around the 3 minute mark, is more emphatic and arpeggiated, and really could be the main theme of its own piece. The fourth departure, at the 4 minute and 25-second mark, has a light galloping quality to its rhythm, and this one goes directly into a quieter theme at 5 minutes and 40 seconds without returning to the rondo theme. After this, the rondo theme returns, and at the 7 minute and 55-second mark, another quiet departure occurs. There's surprisingly a lot of departures and returns to the theme in this movement. The rondo theme doesn't come back again, though, after this last departure, but an outline of its rhythm and dynamic do to end the movement. Track 5 is the second movement, Romanze ziemlich langsam, Melancholy and Feeling. Lugansky brings out the poetry of the movement with his sensitive touch and a slight lag in timing that gives each note the element of feeling like something hesitantly expressed. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, the music becomes firmer, with block chords stabilizing the melody. The gentler feeling of the opening returns with material being resolved. Track 6 is the third movement, Scherzino. This is an elegant movement, and the theme has an appealing dotted rhythm, which Schumann seems to like. There's that dotted rhythm again, the hobby horse rhythm. There are some surprising reaches deep into the bass at certain points, and this has a light kind of charm to it. It's a simple theme. At 1 minute and 20 seconds, a forte episode appears and then gives way to the theme again. Track 7, the fourth movement, Intermezzo, mit größter Energie. This is dark and impassioned. There's very little pause between the previous movement and this, and it seems to take off, rhythmically propelled by left-hand figures as the right hand plays its ardent theme. Track 8, the final movement, movement 5, Finale, höchst lebhaft. As the first movement's rondo seemed like a final movement, this movement, sounding like a virtuoso toccata, seems more like a first movement. It really takes off at the beginning. To a more lyrical melody there. There's a lot of staccato playing, and we're clearly in the hands of a great pianist here. You heard right at the beginning. Yeah. Lugansky balancing everything clearly and defining each phrase with precision at this quick speed. Even the contrasting rhythms between the right and left hands after the 2-minute mark are played with precision and clarity. The virtuoso toccata feeling remains throughout the movement and leads to an exciting build-up to the end. Tracks 9 through 16 are the Humoreske in B-flat major, opus 20. This work takes up two ideas expounded in Jean-Paul's Introduction to Aesthetics. The first idea is the definition of the imagination as visions that take shape and pass from the inner to the outer world. This was a big thing with Schumann. And the second one, the definition of humor as a function of the spirit that allows the universe to be considered from a loftily philosophical angle. The title Humoreske describes a literary genre widespread in Germany at the beginning of the 19th century, consisting of short stories sketching scenes of everyday life. It's an unpredictable and capricious work. In it, Schumann transposes into music the literary idea of the fragment. Indeed, there are several movements in this. Epigrammatic entities independent in themselves, yet capable of association with each other. So that's the fragment. They can stand alone, but then they could also be put together. I guess like a Lego set or something. Track 9, we have movement 1A. Now the album seems to have separated the first movement into two tracks. So we get 1A, Einfach. The opening has a music box quality to it, with a melody floating over arpeggiated figures, playing in a different rhythmic pattern. Lugansky gets the odd floating effect of the melody perfectly here. Track 10, movement 1B, sehr rasch und leicht. This has a rambling quality and an interesting repeating first part of the phrase. An interesting hiccup in there with that theme repeating. I've been saying this throughout, but the balance and clarity of all of the lines is really impressive. At 1 minute and 1 second, there's a change of character to something more urgent, and again, shortly after 1 minute and 14 seconds, to something more subdued. The opening theme of this track returns at around 2 minutes and 25 seconds. The theme decelerates down to the opening melody from track 9. Track 11 is the second movement, Hastig. One interesting element about this movement is that in the piano score, there's a melody marked inner voice that the pianist doesn't play. He's supposed to imagine it and somehow convey it to the audience via his playing of the rest of the material. Okay? I guess the idea is that the pianist imagines the melody, and because he's imagining it, it alters the way he plays what he's actually playing. It's an interesting idea, very romantic, really, and very Schumann-esque. The actual sounds we hear are busy and involve intertwining figures from the right and left hands. The fragmentary nature of this entire piece continues with the sudden change in theme and shift to a fast tempo at around the 1 minute mark. And again, amazing virtuosity from Lugansky here. Bass registers powerfully on the recording, and the entire sound of the piano at this fortissimo dynamic registers with full tone. After this virtuosic passage, the music suddenly slows to rolled chords at 2 minutes and 30 seconds in a chorale type of rhythm. At 3 minutes and 15 seconds, a more ghostly theme emerges over softly arpeggiated accompaniment. The movement ends quietly. Track 12 is the third movement, Einfach und zart. This starts as a soft, busier variation of the opening theme. It's not exactly the same, but there's a familial resemblance. At 1 minute and 55 seconds, there's a sudden change to a staccato bass pattern sprinting across the keyboard as the right hand plays a repeating theme. Yeah, I gotta tell you, watching someone play like Schumann's music, like standing next to the piano and watching their hands fly over the keys, is a pretty exciting thing to do. At 3 minutes and 10 seconds, there's a sudden change back to the opening theme of this movement, and this ABA form movement reaches a quiet ending. Track 13, the fourth movement, Innig. This has a similar pattern to the opening movement with a quicker melody in the right hand. It abruptly moves to a staccato chord theme at 40 seconds, then the opening theme is quickly back, sounding muted perhaps by the una corda pedal. The tone has a certain haze to it in quieter sections, a tone produced by Lugansky here. Track 14, the fifth movement, Sehr lebhaft. This brief movement is virtuosic fire with many moving parts, all beautifully articulated. Strap in, folks, and listen to this. There's a brief slowing in the middle, and then the opening returns in a rush to the end. Track 15, the sixth movement, Mit einigen Pomp. The sixth movement opens fortissimo with granitic, majestic bass notes, laying down an anchor for the crashing chords above. This is also a brief movement, and Lugansky gives it an ample sense of power in his magisterially strong fortissimo. The movement decrescendos to whispering chords at the end. There's a lot of dynamic range in this work. Track 16 is the final movement, the seventh, Zum Beschluss. The opening of the final movement starts with a bit of poetry, a melodic line that sounds more spoken than sung. This quality remains until the second minute, where the right-hand melody starts singing more lyrically. Much of the movement involves the opening declamation moving into the accompaniment and dominating the proceedings. The ending lightens into gentle chords, and a forte set of descending rolled chords brings the piece to its end, and the album comes to an end here too. On this recording, Nikolai Lugansky displays a great range of tonal balance and dynamic, all of which goes far in plumbing the depths of Schumann's complex lines. He provides dramatic levels of contrast between fragmentary sections in all three of these pieces and makes them cohere via his sense of each movement's through line. These are magisterial performances, but I have to say, I think the works lose some of their mystery here, so thoroughly and clearly is each line projected. The Fantasie was the work I wanted to hear the most, and it's a compelling performance, though again, the ruthless exposing of the sections of each score via dramatic interpretational contrast takes away some of the mysteriousness of the piece, which I miss, but didn't think about while hearing the amazing technique on display here. Lugansky understands the character of each of these works and puts each work's individual character across with sensitivity. To get the sense of mystery out of these recordings, you'll have to go way back to older recordings from the 1980s and 1970s. Murray Pariah's recording of the Fantasie comes to mind, and Radu Lupu's recording of the Humoreske. But among today's recordings, this stands out for its clarity, power, and sensitivity.
The album notes describe Schumann's ambition of creating a poetic music that would go beyond ordinary, everyday musical language.
Yeah.
And these works really show off that aim. There are familiar structures along the way, but lots of liberty compared to strict classical forms, with a real romantic sentiment in the melodies and accompaniment. Each work really deserves its own listening session, or you might get fatigued, as I imagine Lugansky got pouring himself into these.
I doubt he recorded these all on the same day. I didn't really check, but...
But I was so intrigued, I listened to it all in one session early in one day.
Man.
And I returned to it at night so I could hear it on my big speaker system, because I enjoyed it that much. And I'm going to go back and listen again. Impressive technique and a full range of expression from subtle nuances to bold climaxes. If I have to pick a favorite of the three works, the melodies in the Fantasie in C major are the most compelling to me, but all three works have a lot to enjoy and a lot of contrast, and I'm eager to hear more of Lugansky's playing on other material now really soon.
Yeah, you'll have to check it out because there's a lot of it online. He's recorded quite a bit, actually. I think I might have other of his recordings on CD here somewhere. This one's going to have to go into the collection. It's just a great piano album.
Yeah.
Okay, our contemporary composer is Augusta Reed Thomas, and her album is called Soul, and this is really performed by various artists who I will mention as we come to each piece. This is on the Nimbus label, released on February 6th. The booklet note is written by Doyle Ambrust, a violist who in the booklet refers to himself as a collaborator with Augusta Reed Thomas, and his enthusiasm about this whole project had me imagining the booklet notes spoken to me by Anthony Robbins. He's got his own unique and very personal and even slightly odd way of describing these works, so much that I really have to send you to the booklet to read them yourself. it would sound too out of character for me to quote them when I'm talking about these works. So I'm going to have to talk about them in my own way. So I want to point that out to you. He does really get you excited about this music. Tracks 1 through 3 is a work called Solstice Ritual, homage to Varese and Ravel for 14 virtuosi, composed in 2024. So this is a relatively new work. Oh, I should mention Augusta Reed-Thomas, American composer. And so this is our second week in a row of American composers.
Right.
All right. So on this piece, Solstice Ritual, we are hearing members of the Grossman Ensemble and guests. And Jeffrey Milarski is the conductor. The musicians are, get your notepad ready because there are a lot of them, Constance Volk on flute, Katie Jumeau, clarinet, Daniel Pesca, piano, Greg Beyer, percussion 1, Adam Rosenblatt, percussion 3, Minghuan Xu, violin 1, Doyle Ambrust, that's the booklet writer, on the viola, Andy Nogal, oboe, Ben Melsky, harp, Winston Choi, celesta, John Corkill, percussion 2, Kyle Flens, percussion 4, Theo Ramsey, violin 2, Nick Fotinos, cello. The piece is inspired by dance, as the title would suggest. The score says it is to be performed with dancers when feasible. That'd be a pretty interesting live performance to attend. Track 1, the first movement, is called Reaching Skyward. Now, interestingly enough, the last piece on this album is going to have the 3 same movement titles. I'll talk about that when we get there. Movement 1, Reaching Skyward, starts with a startling upward leap with chiming metal percussion very present throughout the movement. Booklet note writer Doyle Armbrust is on viola in this work, as I mentioned, and he gets a few solo moments in the movement, as do the cellos and violas. Thomas's work is always striking, and this work starts in a way that grabs the ear and holds on to it throughout. It's really the percussive effects that give this movement its character. They're everywhere, creating enchanting sonorities around the strings. The ensemble has an intriguing variety of timbral possibilities, and that makes this movement a sonic pleasure. The actual string playing is pretty intense, but the chiming sounds around it sort of lighten the intensity a bit. Track 2, 2 drumming rituals. The movement continues from the previous one with powerful drum hits. They play a big part in this movement, which has a more aggressive feel to it. Percussive chimes and woody percussion also feature in the movement. Things slow and quiet down into a mysterious section after the 2-minute mark. Percussion are silent for a while, but come back after the 3-minute mark in a more timbre-led style. Let's hear them return at around the 3-minute and 10-second mark. This is pretty interesting. The percussion works like here. She wants you to concentrate more on the individual timbres, I think. It sounds like each percussion hit is carefully placed, and she's not really thinking of groove here. Like, for example, in our Christopher Rouse work, where he's always thinking about like rock rhythms and really there's a big groove in it. She's really more of the French style of the timbre, even with percussion. It's pretty interesting. The section has a primitive vibe, something like you would imagine goes with the solstice ritual of the title. Powerful percussion hits sounded around the 5-minute and 15-second mark. Some of the percussion used are of the Asian variety, as you can hear at the very end of the movement. And again, that made me think of French composers like Debussy, because he used the Chinese cymbal famously in the Prélude à l'Après-midi d'Enfant, and Augusta Reed Thomas uses it several times actually on this album. Track 3 is the third movement, Bell Prayers. This starts without a pause, and the movement's title promises us more bell-like percussion. At the beginning, we get string harmonics. Chiming percussion eventually comes in, creating a halo around those sustained string tones. Winds will peek in with melodies at times. The bell sounds themselves are in full form by around the 2-minute and 30-second mark. There are some great overtones on these, which the string instruments and flute grab and sustain via their timbres. Let's hear a bit of this movement. We get some very pianissimo violin playing on that too. The work continues to the end, really in this style. Tracks 4 through 6, Magical Flights of the Adarna Bird, composed in 2025. This is a solo cello work, and Alexander Hirsch is the cellist. Now, the title comes from a Filipino legend that the bird in question's song transfers powerful healing properties. Sort of like Mozart's music. We hope, anyway. Track 4, the first movement, Invocation, majestic, blazing, and illuminated. The movement lasts just over a minute and has an arresting opening tone on the solo cello. Again, Thomas managing to draw the listener's attention via a dramatic opening. Track 5, the second movement, Spiritus, lyrical, rhapsodic, animated, and sparkling. This movement is a bit longer at 3 minutes. There's no pause between movements, yet this one is set off via a strong cello bass note. Let's hear it. The movement continues with rapid, repeated notes from the cello, driving the rhythm and melodic shape. It gives the movement a sense of activity. Track 6 is the third and final movement, Spiraling, Healing Poem, elegant and dreamy. The last movement continues on from the previous one and suddenly stops its momentum. It's shyer in character at the opening, playing at a pianissimo. The cello tone strengthens as the movement goes on and becomes lyrical at times. The music dips into the cello's low end after this middle melodic section and comes out of it with double stops. The work ends on pianissimo harmonics. There's a lot of dynamic range in this piece. And I also want to say the Adorna Bird, I really love it when composers do this. They say, oh, the Adorna Bird, its song heals people. I'll write that song. So, it's sort of like Monteverdi, writing an opera about the greatest musician ever in Greek mythology, Orpheus, right? And now he has to write Orpheus's music. It's quite a challenge. Anyway, I certainly hope people are healed listening to this. I rather enjoyed the piece. Tracks 7 through 8, Illuminations, Fanfare Sinfonia for solo timpani, 3 percussion, and 9 brass. There are percussion all over this album. This is composed in 2023 and features Josh Jones on timpani and the DePaul Wind Ensemble with Erika Neidlinger, conductor. Now, the wind ensemble is made up of Hyangsu Jeog, horn 1, Hamed Barbarji, trumpet 1, Maria Merlo, trumpet 3, Eric Korfman, trombone 1, Cameron Randall, bass trombone, Nico Gonzalez, percussion 2, Jonathan Thomas, horn 2, Kai Chun Chang, trumpet 2, Josh Camper, trumpet 4, Rix Barlow, trumpet 2, Sehi Park, percussion 1, Kevin Yetter, percussion 3. The first movement, track 7, is marked ceremonious and then stately. The first 2 notes are not so hidden thank you to the musicians. Let's hear this brassy opening. All right, very cool.
Yeah.
The piece is recorded so that it has serious impact. The percussion is especially powerful. I like the brass sound in the movement too, and the playing. The attack has a thrust to it. Chiming percussion make an appearance about halfway through. The movement continues with brass harmony and percussion. Track 8 is the second movement marked lyrical and then elegant. This connects to the previous movement and comes across as simply a new section of music rather than a separate movement. It continues in much the same vein, except the brass are more mezzo forte with a softer, more cushioned attack. After the second minute, the brass tone is smoother, without the aggressive fuzz on the tone we hear in the fortes. The piece sort of rises to a new level by the 4-minute mark, with the brass lines sustaining and glissandoing in a kind of arc-like shape. The piece ends with some heavy timpani hits and ringing sounds from the metal percussion. Track 9, Light Pearls Through Prisms, composed in 2025. This is a solo piano piece with the pianist Marianne Parker. The booklet note describes listening to the piece as akin to slowly rotating a faceted crystal in one's fingers in a sunlit room surrounded by an abundance of mirrors. I have to say that is a very thorough metaphor. Ever the master of the opening gesture, Thomas begins this piece with 2 forte chords in the high end of the piano. That becomes a recurring pattern, punctuating the line lower in the piano's range. And you got to imagine this light being refracted off the crystal. As you listen, that's really what you're hearing. Thematic notes are allowed to ring out and decay with the damper pedal held down for long periods. Quick figures will end with a sustained note. There are rolled chords as well, and these sorts of long sustained notes being examined through prisms remain the theme of the piece throughout its almost 6 minutes. The piece suddenly ends on a note that's not allowed to sustain. And finally, track 10 through 12, Equinox Ritual, homage to Igor Stravinsky for percussion quartet, composed in 2025. Now, you'll remember the first piece we heard on this album was called Solstice Ritual. This one is Equinox Ritual, and the 3 movements have the same names. This particular piece, though, is all percussion, and the percussionists are Garrett Arney, percussion 1, John Corkill, percussion 2, Adam Rosenblatt, percussion 3, Nonaka Mizukami, percussion 4. The note says that this work acts as a kind of fully realized resonance of Solstice Ritual, and by extension, the culmination of the album's entire transformative arc. Track 10, the first movement, Reaching Skyward, starts with a delicately chiming 2-chord pattern. The chiming percussion carry the entire opening of the work. Okay, we'll come out of it there. There's a lot of silence in this work. It kind of sounds like a vibraphone is in at the 1-minute mark. The movement features carefully placed chiming tones with occasional contrasts provided by firmer tones of woody percussion, always discreet. The movement remains gentle throughout. The movement ends with more drum-like percussion coming in, leading into the next movement. Track 11, the second movement, 3 drumming rituals. Woody percussion, timpani, and assorted drums feature in this movement. It begins again with carefully placed drum hits with no real drive via rhythm as part of the playing. This is all percussive sounds. There's a Chinese cymbal in there too. The chiming percussion of the first movement eventually find their way into this movement too, at around the 3rd minute, and the playing gets quieter. We start hearing rhythmic fragments at around the 4th minute. By the 6th minute, the drums are back in and longer rhythmic patterns come in. Timpani, drums, woody percussion, and the lower tone metal percussion all come in for a pattern of mixed percussion timbre with short rhythmic patterns. This sort of had an ABA pattern with the chiming percussion taking the B section. Track 12, third movement, Bell Prayers. It has a very gentle opening on high chiming percussion played in short patterns that are allowed to resonate. All right, you get the idea. It's really pretty, though. I could listen to that for a long time. Prayers call for contemplative sounds, and that's what we get here. Sound-wise, we could be in a wind chime garden, except, as with the two previous movements, each sound is carefully placed within the rhythmic frame of the movement. After the 3rd minute, the gesture that started the first movement is heard again, and shortly after, with a few more chimes, the piece ends, and so does the album. Augusta Reed Thomas has a genuine way with starting her compositions off with an attention-grabbing gesture. and her approaches to the openings are so different that this never becomes a gimmick. She's like an author who consistently writes great first sentences in his novels. Of course, the rest of the story has to keep you engaged, and Thomas achieves that too. One of the ways she keeps the music interesting on this particular album is the frequent use of percussion. All sorts of unexpected sounds come in with an impact, sometimes chiming, sometimes booming. There's percussion all over this album, except of course in the solo piano and solo cello work, which sort of act as interludes separating the more ornately orchestrated works. And the album even ends with a pure percussion work. Thomas favors the gentler side of percussion and leans toward the French style in her careful placing of timbral combinations in her works. The piano work, Light Pearls Through Prisms, took on more interest after reading Doyle Ambrust's description of the work, and the theme illuminates the solo cello work as well. In fact, Ambrust's notes are really helpful in gaining more appreciation out of these works. You don't need to read them to enjoy the album, but they'll give you new little insights. For me, the ritual pieces beginning and ending the album were favorites due to their mostly gentle use of percussion, but I thought all of this was interesting.
All of the works have a sparseness of orchestration and a strong sense of space in the way ideas are presented here in Thomas's compositions. I think that space creates anticipation and heightens your focus, which should be important in a ritual. The ones I enjoyed the most were the Fanfare Sinfonia for brass and percussion. I thought it had some creative ideas for fanfares. We have kind of a stereotype of these fanfare lines, but this was really creative. And although I'm not usually a fan of percussion works, I did enjoy the Equinox Ritual for its attention to the tone of the percussion. And there's some occasional humor in those sounds as well that caught my ear on the way, and I thought that held my attention, and I found it interesting and entertaining. Over to the jazz half of the program now. We're going to start out in Italy, Mike.
All right, my favorite place.
We started classical in Italy, as far as the music goes anyway, and here we've got Italian musicians with an American repertoire. And the duo is Gianni Virone and Alessandro Chiappetta. Saxophonist Gianni Virone is from Chieri, I guess that's in Turin, in Italy. He graduated from the Conservatorio G. Verdi in Turin and attended several master classes in Italy and abroad with artists like Dave Liebman, Jerry Bergonzi, Enrico Rava, Steve Coleman, and many others. He's won numerous awards and scholarships. He's played with artists like Paolo Fresu, Fabrizio Bosso, Flavio Botro, Javier Girotto, Scott Hamilton, Jimmy Cobb, and more. Alessandro Chiappetta started teaching himself guitar at age 9. He has participated in numerous seminars with famous guitarists such as Jim Hall and John Schofield. Chiappetta has also collaborated with a lot of famous names like Fabrizio Bosso, Miroslav Vicious, George Garzone, Roberto Gatto, Larry Goldings, and more. In 2005, he was awarded a scholarship to attend the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and in 2009 he won the Moncalieri Jazz Festival contest. He's recorded under his own name for the Philology Jazz Records label, and these two musicians have played together for over 20 years, and that experience and their friendship, the notes say, quote, have refined their musical dialogue, finding a unique balance between saxophone and guitar. This synergy has led us to reinterpret jazz standards in our own way, experimenting with new harmonic and improvisational solutions. And they go on to say that the choice of such a diverse repertoire stemmed from the desire to explore different improvisational directions and to fully express the potential of our duo. The absence of the traditional rhythm section with bass and drums has pushed us to find alternative solutions for the accompaniments, constantly testing ourselves in a delicate balance between our parts. All right, keep that in mind as we check out this music. Gianni Virone's on tenor sax and one tune with clarinet here, and Alessandro Chiappetta's on both electric and acoustic guitars. This was recorded in December 2024 at Only Music Studio, Burino, Italy. Sound engineering, mixing, and mastering by Carlo Miodi, and it's produced by the two musicians themselves. They describe the program as standards, and there's one from the American Songbook, but most are originals by some of the greats of modern jazz, with one tune from an earlier era. And we're going to start out with a couple tunes from Sonny Rollins. Track 1 is Doxy. This was first recorded by Rollins with Miles Davis on the album Bag's Groove in 1954. This tune has a happy 16-measure melody, and you'll get a hint at how things are going to be collaborative here by how they trade off phrases on the melody, sometimes joining up together. Then Virone is off on a solo. Let's hear things get started. Yeah, nice. And I like the chunky guitar chords making a walking feel that go on from there. Chiappetta follows with some backing from Virone, and let's check out some of the trading they do after the guitar solo a little later on. Yeah, playful and very responsive to each other's ideas, and it's back to the melody from there to finish it up. Track 2 is also by Sonny Rollins' Pent Up House, and this is on Sonny Rollins +4 with Clifford Brown from 1956. Jazz fans will know the melody from the great original recording. It starts with a pickup line into the repeating 16-measure tune, but not here. I'm not quite sure how Chiappetta is making this neat muted sound. It comes off sounding somewhat like a kalimba. Virone joins in with the improvisations, and they're off to the races with exchanged lines. Let's check it out. It's a lot of fun. What about the melody, you say? Well, they'll get to that too, with some more staccato inspiration from the intro. Listening to that again, although I've listened to it a couple of times, I wonder if that wasn't some like slap-tongue reed playing that then goes into the guitar muting there at the beginning. I guess I'll have to listen to it again. Track 3, here's our American Songbook tune from Irving Berlin, How Deep is the Ocean from 1932. The verse is recycled from the song How Much I Love You that was written by Berlin for the musical Reaching for the Moon in 1930, but never used. And it was recorded by Paul Whiteman and then Bing Crosby in 1932. A classic ballad, Chiappetta gives it some motion with a chordy intro, and Virone blows the melody with a warm, breathy tone. Let's hear it. Virone continues on for a solo over chunky guitar chords. Let's hear some of the guitar solo on this one. And back to the melody from there with a classy ending idea. Track 4 is Dewey Square from Charlie Parker, which he recorded in 1947. This is a contrafact of George Gershwin's Oh Lady Be Good. On this one, they take the A sections of the melody in unison, and Chiappetta takes the B. Virone is off on an energetic solo first. Let's check this one out. Chiappetta's rhythmic chords really drive Virone along. Let's hear a little bit more of this bouncy bop excitement. Chiappetta keeps the forward motion going in his solo as well. Next we've got a trio of Thelonious Monk tunes, starting out with track 5, Misterioso. This was the first 12-bar blues that Monk wrote and was first recorded in 1948 for the Wizard of the Vibes sessions featuring Milt Jackson. They take it at a more relaxed tempo than Monk usually did. It's a curious melody made of rising sixth intervals, and Virone is off playing the blues after that. Let's hear some of Chiappetta's ideas on Monk's blues as well. Back to the melody from there. Track 6 is In Walked Bud, and this is from the 1947 Genius of Modern Music sessions. In Walked Bud is loosely based on the chord progressions of Blue Skies, composed in 1927 by Irving Berlin, and Monk composed it as a tribute to jazz pianist Bud Powell. Here, Chiappetta takes the A sections of the melody solo, and Virone takes over on the B and continues on for the first solo. And on this one, they both work the whole melody together at the end. And track 7, Monk's Epistrophe, this was co-written with Kenny Clarke and was copyrighted in 1941 by Monk, but the first recording was by Cootie Williams in 1942, and it was later recorded by Clarke's band in 1946. Monk didn't get around to recording it until 1948 for the Wizard of the Vibes sessions. It's a relatively atonal kind of 32-bar tune in an A-B-C-B form, but the key center is in C sharp. Let's check it out. The improvisations are really interactive on this one. Chiappetta is really inventive with variations of accompaniment ideas for Virone. Let's check out a little bit of that. That interesting triplet line he came up with there on the way. And if you want more Monk, be sure to tune in next week. Got some really interesting versions of Monk's music for you lined up.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go over to Bill Evans for track 8, Time Remembered, first recorded with Freddie Hubbard and Zoot Sims in 1962, but not released until years later. It's also on Bill Evans' trio with Symphony Orchestra, recorded in 1965. This is an interesting choice. Every version of this tune I've heard by Bill Evans is very different because of his rubato feel and embellishments of the melody. Chiappetta's on acoustic guitar for this one, and they managed to keep a sense of rubato as well as adding some bossa nova feel to the 26-measure melody. Virone has a full but just breathy enough tone and plays through with improvisations connecting back to the melody. Track 9, Charles Mingus's Nostalgia in Times Square. This is on the album Mingus in Wonderland from 1959. Chiappetta uses an interesting effect for this one. The tone reminds me of a 1960s Vox organ kind of sound.
Right, yeah. This stood out for me, too.
Yeah. He gives the tune an 18-measure intro, and then Virone is in on the 12-bar blues melody, continuing on with a solo. let's check out some more of this interesting guitar tone. Interesting. And back to the melody from there. Track 10 is John Coltrane's Moment's Notice from 1957's Blue Train. They give this a new bouncy feel with a 16-measure intro before the melody. Let's check it out. On this one, let's hear some of their exchanges after Virone's solo. Back to the melody from there to wrap it up. And the recording ends up with track 11, Spencer Williams's Basin Street Blues, recorded by Louis Armstrong in 1928. Jumping back to an earlier era of jazz for this classic melody, Virone gets out the clarinet for this one, and he has a fine liquid tone. Chiappetta has a different guitar tone here again. Let's check it out. Well, I just love hearing the clarinet. It's something we don't hear enough of in jazz anymore. So before we go out, let's hear one more sample. Gianni Virone and Alessandro Chiappetta show that there is more than enough inspiration still to be had in this collection of mostly original compositions by jazz greats of the bop and post-bop eras. They've reimagined a lot of the tunes rhythmically and with arrangements full of interplay, taking advantage of the freedom without bass and drums and using a lot of imagination. Virone's tenor sound is full but breathy when he wants it for expression, and he's absorbed the styles from Rollins and Coltrane, adding his own persona. A nice tone and style on the clarinet, too. Chiappetta is the whole rhythm section, and he does a fine job with chunky chords, creative rhythmic ideas, and evolving backing ideas on both electric and acoustic guitar, with a couple unexpected effects for variety. The camaraderie and interaction between them makes the improvised sections a lot of fun to listen to in each song, keeping things fresh straight through the recording.
Yeah, you can tell these two are really closely attuned to each other. Often one will be stretching out into a solo, and when he goes too far, like the other will bring him back. It's pretty interesting. There's great communication. For example, in Dewey Square, the sax solos and the guitar via its upbeat playing urges him on, while in Epistrophe, there's a sudden intrusion of the guitar that reins in the sax. I just found this whole interaction just fascinating throughout the album. I also love the moment in Walked Bud when the theme returns at the end with Chiappetta sticking his solo landing perfectly. These moments were just great. There are a lot of great moments on this album. Virone gets in the moment with his solo on Dewey Square, which had some real presence to it. And the same goes for Alessandro Chiappetta on Misterioso and In Walked Bud. He seems to have been inspired by the Monk tunes most of all. That's Chiappetta. Overall, the album is really enjoyable and ends with two lighter, happy-sounding tracks to leave you in a good mood. It's the interaction between Virone and Chiappetta that kept me interested, and all of those just magical moments on the album. I recommend hearing this all the way through and be ready to be surprised and delighted.
Familiar old material with new spontaneous ideas. It's great. All right, from a duo to a trio. We've got Philly 3 from pianist James Fernando. This is on Spring Garden Records. It came out February 6th. James Fernando was born in 1995. He's a Philadelphia-based pianist and composer, and he blends jazz, classical, and electronic influences in his music. He's a Berklee College of Music graduate, and he's recorded on 6 albums so far, starting with his solo debut, The Lonely Sailor, in 2019. He teaches at Levine Music in Washington, D.C., and regularly leads workshops at universities and community music schools across the U.S. Fernando's influences are diverse from Errol Garner to Oscar Peterson, Brad Mehldau, and Tigran Hamasyan. This is his debut jazz trio album with these musicians who started playing together in 2023. So James Fernando on the piano, and almost all original compositions here except for the last tune, which is an Errol Garner tune. Dan McCain on bass for most of the tracks, and Sam Harris guests on bass on 2 tunes, and I'll point them out as we go. Keon Williams on the drums. It's produced by James Fernando, the tracking engineer Brendan McGeehan, and mixing and mastering engineer is just listed as Starkey. The recording gets underway with Persistence, and we'll get some of Fernando's classical influence right away. There are a lot of transformations in all the tunes that will be really hard to capture in samples here. This one gets going with rhythmic piano chords cycling around and over bowed bass from McCain. Fernando starts to pull out some melodic lines as it goes, and Williams joins in subtly and then gets a neat groove going. That will take up most of a sample of the first minute of the tune, so let's hear it get going. Williams gets to work up some furious drumming over a new section of chords and interesting ringing bass and left-hand piano lines. That transitions to a restart of the opening rhythmic feel for Fernando to launch off from into improvisations. There's a lot of energy there with Williams really popping underneath. Fernando works on with his left hand punching out full bass lines under more improvisations that go on to capture some Latin mood. Let's hear some of that. And it works to a fading ending from there. Wow, what a start. Track 2, Unlikely Animal Friendships. A solo piano start for this nostalgic-sounding 32-measure waltzing melody. Fernando pulls out the melody notes over a flowing but busy accompaniment. The next section has ringing high bass notes from McCain that work to a unison melody section with piano. Then a new section with bass and piano left hand with a fun high right hand piano part and animated drums. We'll get into that much of it with a sample of the beginning. Fernando's improvisations are rhythmically inventive and playful on this one as it works to a pause after more running bass lines, and McCain gets a slowed and ringing melodic bass solo, so let's hear some of his playing on this tune. He gets to play on for about 2 minutes, leading to a reserved exposition of the melody by Fernando at the slow tempo and a final animated ending like the section we ended the first sample with. This tune was a lot of fun. Track 3 is The Parisian, and Sam Harris guests on bass on this one. Put on your seat buckle here. The opening section works a 16-measure idea around twice in a 3-beat feel with fun, plinky, high right-hand figures on the piano over synced left hand and bass with drum brushes from Williams. Then a section of old-time stride piano comes to a cute break with piano figures before they're off swinging over walking bass from Harris. Check this out. In his improvisations, Fernando works in a quote of, "I'm beginning to see the light." Let's hear some more of this rollicking fun. Harris gets a bass solo next, before they return to the opening 2 sections, and then the first section once more to end it. Track 4 is Singularity, a merging of a lot of influences in this one. The opening section has a frantic, psychedelic, Baroque-like right-hand piano part on top of slow-moving bowed bass lines. The way that Williams's drum bass kicks with the bass and the busy drumming create an impression of electronic music, and the juxtaposition creates some interesting harmonic combinations. Bowed bass and a piano pedal tone with sparser chords takes us through a nocturne-like section next. Let's hear this get started. And then when we wake up from this section, it's as if we've been transported to Cuba. So let's check out a little bit of that as well. Kane gets a great bass solo that really digs in next. There's a more chordal section where Williams gets to churn up a lot of energy on the drums, leading to more piano improvisations with Latin and jazz ideas to the end. Track 5 is Neon Keon, obviously written for drummer Keon Williams. Bass and both piano hands sync up for a super syncopated melody with lots of gaps for Williams to fill out. The phrasing is uneven sections of 10 and then 12 measures. The next middle section switches up with walking bass. There's a monkish kind of playfulness to it, and as it moves out of the final section into Fernando's improvisations, a one-note bass and popping drum beat brings in some New Orleans flavor too. Piano solo follows a blues progression that's stretched to 24 measures with a lot of fun interaction between Fernando's left and right hands, and Williams gets a drum solo feature, so let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Fernando works a section of some funky chords, leading up to another time through the opening melody section. Track 6 is Beings on Toast, that's B-E-I-N-G-S. This is a minor tune. After an 8-measure intro, Fernando works the theme with interesting flourishes. It sounds like 36 measures before he's off on improvisations. Williams's drum toms and rim cracks add a lot of atmosphere. Don't get settled into that groove too much, because they're going to upshift it to a racing swing feel into a section of Williams's drumming. Let's hear a little bit of that. Fernando and McCain are back to trade phrases with the drums before things chill back to the original tempo for another time through the melody to a quiet ending. Track 7 is Potions. This makes an initial impression as a super slow ballad in 4, but the fourth measure has only 3 beats, and soon a bass and left-hand piano line perfectly accented by Williams hijacks the rhythmic direction. It settles again for some final soft touches from Fernando on the melody. Let's hear it get started. McCain has a pleading and melodic bass solo on this one that we can check out as well. Return to the left-hand piano and bass lines, and a hold and pause end for the first half of the tune. But there's a whole new rhythmic and energized second half that you'll have to check out on your own. Track 8 is What's the Password? After an 8-measure intro, the minor melody has a nostalgic kind of Cotton Club atmosphere, but changing gears is the name of the game here. Within the first minute, you'll hear it get off racing, come back to the original tempo, and then settle into a loping swing. And the final section of the melody has a speed up again. Let's check out some of Fernando's piano solo on this one. Yeah, Williams gets another solo feature with bass and piano interjections on the way. There's a final melody section to a sudden ending. And the recording finishes up with Errol Garner's Like It Is, a tune he recorded in 1967. Sam Harris is in on bass for this one, and you'll hear his harmonic at the start. It's a fun tune that balances rollicking lines and classy lightness. Let's hear it get started. Harris has a bass solo on this one too, but let's hear a final sample of Fernando do his thing with some fun tremolos on the way. And back to Garner's great melody from there to finish things up. And that's the recording. James Fernando has amazing piano technique and an overflowing barrel of ideas to apply it to in his original compositions. He's also got a wide variety of influences from classical music, early jazz styles, Latin music, and beyond, and those come through, often many in a single tune. As we heard in the samples, rarely do things settle into one rhythmic groove for long. That all makes listening to Philly 3 an exciting and often surprising listening experience. Keon Williams is the perfect drummer for Fernando's approach, handling all the change-ups effortlessly and injecting a lot of rhythmic energy underneath and in his solo sections. Dan McCain is right there too, showing a lot of versatility with great bass lines and the bow, and his solos have great tone and melodic direction. Sam Harris guests on 2 tunes as well with fine solos. It's a piano trio recording with roots in the past and visions for the future with never a dull moment.
Well, first of all, this recording has a rich low end and all kinds of interesting sounds, such as Dan McCain coming in on a harmonic for his entry in Unlikely Animal Friendships, an uplifting track that really caught me by surprise. In fact, this whole album caught me by surprise. There's very active drumming from Keon Williams, who gets into soloing patterns while he's keeping time, and he's well captured on the recording. He hits hard, which I like, and I actually think he's the trio's secret weapon. His propulsion sounds like it makes the other 2 push harder. I like the way he livens up the simple chord pattern at the beginning of Beings on Toast, and I thought James Fernando's great moment was in the solo of What's the Password, where he starts a swinging solo and then comes up with creative ways to change his playing in that groove. He's also got a great feel for old-time jazz as demonstrated in The Parisian and Like It Is, and he brings a lot of character to both of those tracks. The compositions themselves have really interesting approaches both in structure and in the improvisational decisions made by each member of the trio. I like the cross rhythms and hard-hitting drums on Singularity. This is an exciting record with a lot of creativity on it. It's a good example of how you can utilize the mainstream jazz language and create new things. And for that reason, I wanted this on a CD and it's not available. It's only a streaming. I looked on Bandcamp for this. Put it out on a CD, guys.
This is probably my pick of best piano trios so far this year. So
I thought so too. I really liked this a lot. I was like, whoa, you know?
Really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
All right, we've got one more from drummer Tobias Frohnhöfer, Dragon Boat on Laika Records. This came out on February 6th. Jazz drummer and vibraphonist Tobias Frohnhöfer was born in Germany in 1990. He started drums at age 6, later studying piano and vibraphone. As a teen, his jazz trio won major European jazz competitions, released 2 albums, and performed at festivals. He trained in jazz vibraphone at Mannheim University of Music, then studied in the USA with names like Victor Lewis, John Riley, and Jay Hoggart, leading to his debut album, Informal. It was released in 2017. Returning to Germany, he worked with Richie Bayrock and has toured and collaborated with artists like Dave Liebman, Kurt Rosenwinkel, and Alex Sipiagin, Till Bronner as well. He relocated to Hamburg in 2020 and completed a jazz master's degree in 2024. And he leads his trio that we'll hear on this recording with a special guest. So Tobias Frohnhöfer on drums and all original compositions, Tilman Oberbeck on the bass, Boris Nitzvetayev on piano, and guest Alex Sipiagin on the trumpet, who we heard last week on Max Kokotov's saxophone recording. This was recorded at Blue Wave Studio in Hamburg, mastering and mixing engineer Mike Marciano, recording engineer Matthias Riediger. The recording gets underway with a tune called Nankan Ride. Frohnhöfer opens it with 2 measures of drums, and your ear will be drawn to what he does through the whole tune with tight fills and interesting drumming panned somewhat to the left. The melody is modern and modal, a 17-measure idea that goes around twice. Nitzvetayev is on electric piano for this one, and Sipiagin is off on a solo right away. Let's hear this get started. Sipiagin is always energetic, but Frohnhöfer is really driving him along on this one. Nitzvetayev follows with an electric piano solo that has some nice rhythmic ideas, and after going through the melody again, they vamp a bit for Frohnhöfer to get worked up on a drum solo, so let's check out some of his playing. Track 2 is called Wawa. Sipiagin and Oberbeck's bass get this mysterious 3/4 time tune going for the first 18-measure section. Drums and piano join in on the way. The next main section is 24 measures with light tom work and cymbals from Frohnhöfer underneath. At the slow tempo, it takes about 2 minutes, but we can at least hear it get started. Nitzvatayev has a piano solo on this one with ideas that hang in space and some nice rippling lines too. Let's check out some of his playing. Sapiegan has a solo that builds up slowly to soaring high notes before joining back into the melody to the end with some final improvisations over a vamp. Track 3 is Dragon Boat, the title track, another modal tune with some interesting harmonies. There's an 8-measure intro and a 32-measure evolving melody that Sapiegan plays lyrically. Let's check this out. After the melody, there's an 8-measure transition section into a bass solo from Oberbeck. Let's check out his playing on this tune. Sapiegan solos next, again going up high and having a lot of agile chromatic lines. The rhythm dissolves and resets with a piano solo from Nitzvatayev and Frohnhöfer backing with some new clicky ideas on the drums. It starts again from the intro idea through the first section of the melody, but they take it to a new place with more improvisations from Sapiegan and drum energy from Frohnhöfer before the ending. Track 4 is called Black Hole. This one moves along with a nice skipping swing feel in Frohnhöfer's cymbals. There's a 16-measure intro with some fun bass lines under the piano. Sapiegan takes the repeating 29-measure melody that gets a feeling of lift from the harmonies under it as it goes along, and then it comes back down. around again there. Netsvatayev is off on a solo on piano first, with lots of fluid lines and some choppy chords. Sipyagin gets a long solo here that works to an exciting climax, so let's hear how he finishes up on this one. Frohnhöfer and Oberbeck do some trading into a bouncy bass ostinato that brings back Sipyagin with the melody and some final phrase repeats to finish it up. Track 5 is Still Sure. Netsvatayev starts this one out solo on the piano for about 2 minutes. That will be hard to capture in a sample, so I'll leave you to check it out. Let's hear the dreamy ballad melody when the others join in. Trumpet melody is 21 measures, and then Oberbeck has a bass solo that really sings out melodically, and Sipyagin follows with a gentle solo that continues to the end. Track 6 is Talk Too Much. Oberbeck gets to start this one on bass with wandering lines before working an 8-beat ostinato to bring in the others on the introduction. The melody has a maiden voyage kind of modal mood to it. Let's hear it from where the bass ostinato gets going. Yeah, I like the unique groove here. Let's hear some of Sipyagin's solo on this one with energetic drumming from Frohnhöfer. Nitzvatayev has a solo that flows freely on this one too, before they get back to the melody and more improvisations from Sipyagin. And the recording ends up with track 7, You Made a Mistake. A busy Latin beat and some spacey electric piano get going on a 16-measure intro. The melody has a catchy riff that modulates around on the repeating 32-measure melody played by Sipyagin. Let's hear it get going. Sipyagin continues on with the solo. Nitzvatayev has an electric piano solo too, and Frohnhöfer wraps up the solos with an impressive one on the drums. So let's make that our final sample here. And back to the melody from there to wrap up the tune and the recording. Tobias Frohnhöfer is an exciting drummer who exudes a lot of energy even when he's playing lightly. He covers a lot of ground on Dragon Boat, from driving swing and straight beats to more textured tones and fills on free-flowing passages. His compositions are modern-sounding and harmonically challenging, but with melodic ideas that become familiar quickly. Alex Sipyagin handles the themes with his usual flair, and he sounds particularly inspired for his improvisations on this recording. The rest of the trio matches the energy with great backing and exploratory piano improvisations from Boris Nitzvatayev and great grooves and melodic solos from Tilman Oberbeck. The recording is 52 minutes long, but with just 7 tunes, everyone gets ample time to develop their ideas and solos, which is what we like. The music here catches your interest and keeps it right to the end of the recording.
And my first impression on this album was, whoa, when I heard Alex Sipyagin on that first track, that he just exploded out of the gate.
Yeah, he does.
It's a great solo. People go and sample that in full. It was really great. He's in fine form on this entire album, really. And also on the last track, he was pretty great. You Made a Mistake. He sounds great there. Boris Nitzvatayev made a big impression on this album with his oddly colored chords and harmonic sense. He keeps to a drifting tonal quality in his solos, and he really seemed like some shaman coming out of the wilderness to state his piece. You know, he just kind of, he doesn't really seem in tune with everyone else. He just kind of comes and does his thing. He was unique to the entire approach of the others on the album. Tobias Frohnhöfer is a propulsive, hard-hitting drummer that keeps things moving. I mean, you heard the samples that Russ gave us with that propulsive drumming. He mixes up patterns quickly in his solos, and Tijman Oberbeck had a soulful, heartfelt quality on bass during his solos. It's an interesting mix of approaches, particularly with the piano, and is worth hearing, especially for Sipiagin's playing throughout, I thought. Though it's everybody else that inspires him, I'm sure. It's a really great and very interesting recording.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of drummer composers recently. And since Frohnhöfer is also a vibes player, he's obviously got a good sense of harmony. I'd like to hear him on the vibes sometime as well. But yeah, he's a powerful drummer. All right, that's going to wrap things up for episode 247 and the start of our 6th year at Adult Music.
Yeah, coming up next week.
Yeah, and we've got a lineup for next week, episode 248. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And what do you have lined up on the classical side, Mike?
Well, we're just not giving up with the cello. This is the 3rd week in a row that we've got some cello recordings going. So I've got a Bach on 9 strings, and this is by Mario Brunello on the 4-string Violoncello Piccolo. I'll tell you more about what that is when I learn myself next week. And Mauro Valli on the 5-string Violoncello Piccolo. So we have 9 strings there, all Bach. That's on the Arcana label. That's our Baroque album. Next, I have an album called Italian Perspectives, featuring music by Giuseppe Martucci, Ottorino Respighi, and Sergei Rachmaninoff. Go figure. It's an arrangement by Respighi of his Etude Tableau for piano. The thing that really drew me to this album was Respighi's Trittico Botticelliano, which rarely gets recorded, and I really wanted to hear it because I sampled it and I thought, wow, just magical orchestration. So I'm looking forward to hearing this. That's on the Pentatone label. And then for the contemporary, well, we have 20th century and contemporary mixed here. It's another all-American program, kind of. We have Samuel Barber's String Quartet. Now, this is interesting because the middle movement of this is the famous Adagio for strings. This is its original version, so you get to hear it in its original context here without the massed strings. And then we have a piece by Wynton Marsalis on that, and John Williams as well, the Star Wars composer John Williams. I think this is film music by him from the film Lincoln, but I haven't really confirmed that. And then a string quartet by Erich Wolfgang Korngold, who's really Austrian, but he became an American citizen later in life, wrote a lot of great film scores, and that's what we're going to hear next week.
All right. On the jazz side, we're going to have another organ-centered episode. I've actually been waiting for a new release from Pat Bianchi, the organist, which hasn't come out yet. I think it's going to be another week, but I came up with 3 other organ trios that I really want to listen to. So we're going to start out with an Australian trio, the Jake Mason Trio, and their music is kind of inspired by the great organ trios of the 60s, but we've got all original compositions here, so we'll check that one out to begin with. Then we've got guitarist Aleph Aguilar, who's originally from Venezuela, but now he plays in the UK, and he's got another great 60s kind of jazz-inspired recording called Sugar on My Black Beans. And this also features Quentin Collins on the trumpet. And both of those albums, we're going to get our dose of boogaloo that we really like.
Nice.
And then we're going to move on to the latest from organist Gregory Lewis and his Organ Monk project. We heard his previous recording, Thelonious Monk tunes on the organ. And this is Organ Monk Sings. This will feature vocalist Raina Welch with vocals on Monk's tunes that have been added by some lyricists and singers over the years, as well as some of her original vocals as well. And the recording's also got Jerry Weldon on tenor sax. So we'll get a full dose of Thelonious Monk's music in a way we don't usually hear it, with vocals and Hammond organ. As always, we'll have all of these recordings, classical and jazz, up on our Deezer playlist a few hours after this episode's published, and I'll put up a link to it from our Facebook page as well. 5 years, Mike.
There it is. Amazing. I can't believe we heard this much. It doesn't seem like it, you know?
Yeah.
They go by fast.
All right, then. Well, thanks for staying with us to the end here, and thanks to all of our regular listeners. We'll keep doing this and looking for the best music to share with you in future episodes. So until next week, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.